Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Homecoming. The desert sand still clung to Jake Mitchell's boots as he stepped off the military transport plane at Fort Bragg. His left arm hung in a sling, the bones still healing from the IED blast that had ended his third tour in Afghanistan. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and 15 years of service had earned him an early retirement he never wanted. At 38, Jake Mitchell was a warrior without a war. The drive to his hometown of Cedar Falls took 4 hours. 4 hours of thinking about Vanessa, about their daughter Sarah, about the life he'd left behind. He'd called ahead, but Vanessa's phone went straight to voicemail. Probably at work, he told himself. She managed the local insurance office, a job she'd taken after Sarah started school. Jake Mitchell hadn't always been a soldier. Born to working-class parents in Cedar Falls, he'd been the town's golden boy, quarterback, valedictorian, the kid everyone said would make something of himself. He'd met Vanessa Sanders at 17. She was the cheerleader with dreams bigger than their small town. They married young, had Sarah at 22, and for a while, life was perfect. Then 9/11 happened. Jake felt the call to serve, to protect what he loved. Vanessa supported him, or so she said. The first deployment was hard but manageable. The second strained their marriage. By the third, they were holding on by threads and weekly video calls. Cedar Falls looked smaller than he remembered. The main street still had Murphy's Diner and the old theater, but half the storefronts were empty now. His house sat on Elm Street, a modest 2-story colonial with the white picket fence he'd built himself. Home. Jake pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed changes. The lawn was overgrown, his carefully maintained flower beds were dead, and there was a strange truck parked in his spot, a lifted Ford with mud tires and Confederate flag decals. His key still worked. The house felt different the moment he stepped inside. The family photos that once lined the hallway were gone. His military commendations had been removed from the wall. Even the smell was wrong, cigarettes and cheap cologne instead of Vanessa's vanilla candles. "Hello," Jake called out, setting his duffel bag down. "Vanessa?" "Sarah." Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs. A shirtless man appeared, tall, muscular, covered in tattoos. Jake recognized the ink. Prison tattoos, crude and amateur. The man had Blake Sanders written across his knuckles in faded blue letters. "Get lost," Blake said, not even surprised to see Jake. "This ain't your house anymore." Jake's military training kicked in. He assessed the threat. Blake was younger, maybe early 30s, had reach and probably weighed on him. But Jake had experience Blake couldn't imagine. Still, the broken arm limited his options. Before Jake could respond, Vanessa appeared behind Blake. She looked older, harder. Her blonde hair was darker now, streaked with premature gray. She wore the same defiant expression she'd had as a teenager when her parents tried to tell her what to do. "This is his house now," Vanessa said, slipping her arm around Blake's waist. "You need to leave." The words hit Jake like another IED blast. 15 years of marriage, dismissed with a sentence. But something else gnawed at him, something wrong with the picture. "Where's my daughter?" Jake demanded. Vanessa's smile turned cruel, predatory. "She died 3 months ago, screaming your name." The world stopped. Sarah, his little princess, his reason for fighting, for surviving, dead. And they'd never told him. Never called, never wrote. He'd been bleeding in a desert hospital while his daughter was dying, calling for a father who didn't know. "Howl." The word came out as a whisper. "Car accident," Blake said, lighting a cigarette. "Drunk driver. Kid suffered for hours before she died. Kept asking where daddy was." He blew smoke in Jake's direction. "Where were you, soldier boy?" Jake's vision tunneled. Every nerve in his body screamed for violence. But he forced himself to stand still. To think. To plan. These people had no idea what they'd just unleashed. "I want to see her grave," Jake said quietly. "You lost that right when you abandoned your family," Vanessa spat. "Sarah died thinking you didn't love her anymore." The last thing she said was, "Why won't daddy come home?" Blake stepped closer, invading Jake's space. "You heard the lady. Time to go. This is my house, my woman, and you ain't welcome." Jake looked around the living room one more time. His wedding photo with Vanessa was gone, replaced by pictures of her and Blake. Sarah's honor roll certificates had been removed. Even the couch where he used to read bedtime stories was different. But Jake Mitchell hadn't survived 3 combat tours by being careless. His eyes cataloged everything. The The security system he'd installed was disabled. The gun safe in the basement had been moved. And Blake Sanders, he'd heard that name before. "I'll be going then," Jake said, turning toward the door. "Good luck to both of you." "That's it." Blake laughed. "No tears. No begging? What kind of man are you?" Jake paused at the door. "The kind you should have been afraid of." Outside, Jake sat in his truck for a long time. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of burning leaves. Somewhere in Cedar Falls, his daughter lay buried in a grave he'd never seen. His wife, ex-wife, he supposed, was living with another man in the house he'd bought with his military pay. But Jake Mitchell was a planner. Always had been. And Blake Sanders had made a fatal error. He'd let Jake see him. Let Jake know who he was dealing with. Jake pulled out his phone and made a call. "Murphy? It's Jake Mitchell. I'm back in town. I need a favor." Chapter 2. The Investigation. Murphy's Diner hadn't changed in 15 years. Same red vinyl booths, same handwritten menu, same smell of coffee and bacon grease. Murphy Carlson, the owner, had been Jake's father's best friend and the closest thing Jake had to family now. "Jesus Christ, Jake," Murphy said, sliding a cup of black coffee across the table. "You look like hell. Feel worse." Jake's arm ached, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hole where his heart used to be. "Tell me about Sarah." Murphy's weathered face crumpled. At 65, he'd seen enough tragedy for several lifetimes, but Sarah's death had hit the whole town hard. "Sweet kid. Always came in here after school, did her homework right over there." He pointed to a corner booth. "Smartest little thing you ever saw." "How did it happen?" "Drunk driver hit her walking home from the library." "Tommy Walsh, you remember him? Kevin Baker's nephew?" "Kid was wasted, driving his daddy's pickup. Plowed right into her on Maple Street." Jake filed the name away. "Tommy Walsh. Did she suffer?" Murphy's silence was answer enough. "Paramedics said she kept asking for you. Vanessa was there, but Sarah wanted her daddy." The knife twisted deeper. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Vanessa said you'd been notified. Said the military would handle it." Murphy's eyes narrowed. "But that Blake character showed up to the funeral acting like he belonged there. Most folks thought it was strange, you being overseas and all." "Blake Sanders." The name still bothered Jake. "What do you know about him?" "Piece of trash. Did 5 years in state prison for armed robbery. Been sniffing around Vanessa for about 6 months now. Word is he's her cousin, but..." Murphy shrugged. "Family's family, I guess. Cousin." That explained the surname. But it also raised questions about when exactly their relationship had started. Jake pulled out his phone and showed Murphy a photo, Blake's truck in his driveway. "Yeah, that's his. Bought it with cash about 3 months ago. Same time your insurance paid out." "Insurance?" Murphy looked uncomfortable. "Life insurance. On Sarah. Vanessa collected $100,000. Jake's blood turned to ice. He'd forgotten about the policy, a small one he'd taken out when Sarah was born. But the timing was suspicious. Sarah dies, insurance pays out. Blake suddenly has cash for a new truck and moves into Jake's house. "Murphy, I need to ask a favor. And you can't tell anyone we talked." "Course, son. What do you need?" "Information. About Blake Sanders, about the accident, about anything that happened while I was gone." Murphy nodded. "I'll make some calls. But Jake, be careful. Blake's got friends. Mean ones." Jake left the diner with more questions than answers. His next stop was the Cedar Falls Cemetery. Sarah's grave was in the newest section, marked with a simple headstone. "Sarah Michelle Mitchell. Beloved daughter. The angels needed you more." No mention of her father. No military honors despite Jake's service. Just a generic message that could have come from a catalog. Fresh flowers lay on the grave. Roses, Sarah's favorite. But they weren't from a florist. These were from someone's garden, picked that morning. Jake looked around and spotted an elderly woman tending a nearby grave. "Excuse me," Jake said, approaching carefully. "Did you know Sarah Mitchell?" The woman looked up. Diana Bird, the librarian. She'd been old when Jake was a kid. "You must be Jake. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you. Were you at the funeral?" Diana's expression darkened. "Such a shame. Poor child loved books so much. Used to come in every day after school." She lowered her voice. "Can I tell you something? Something that bothered me about that night." Jake nodded. "Sarah wasn't walking home from the library. We close at 6, and the accident happened at 8:30. She was coming from somewhere else." Another piece that didn't fit. Do you know where? No, but Diana glanced around nervously. That boy who hit her, Tommy Walsh. He wasn't drunk. What? I saw him earlier that day. Sober as a judge. Been going to AA meetings for 6 months. His sponsor is my nephew. Diana leaned closer. The police report said his blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. But I'm telling you, that boy hadn't been drinking. Jake's mind raced. A sober driver suddenly drunk. A victim nowhere near where she was supposed to be. Insurance money flowing to the mother and her new boyfriend. The pieces of a larger picture were emerging. Mrs. Bird, is there somewhere we can talk privately? They went to her small house behind the library. Diana made tea while Jake tried to process what he was learning. His daughter's death might not have been an accident. Tommy Walsh was devastated, Diana continued. Kept saying he didn't remember drinking anything. But who's going to believe a kid with a DUI record? He had priors? One. From when he was 18. But that was 2 years ago, and he'd been clean since. Diana's hands shook as she poured the tea. Jake, I think something terrible happened to that boy. And to your Sarah. Have you told anyone this? Who would listen to an old lady? Besides, Blake Sanders made it clear that asking questions about the accident wasn't healthy. Threats. Blake was threatening witnesses. Jake's training told him they were onto something big. Mrs. Bird, I need you to write down everything you remember about that night. Every detail. And don't tell anyone we talked. Driving away from Diana's house, Jake's phone rang. Murphy. Jake, you need to get down here. Now. What's wrong? That information you wanted? I found some of it. And son, it's worse than you think. Back at the diner, Murphy led Jake to his office above the restaurant. Spread across the desk were newspaper clippings, police reports, and a manila folder marked private. Blake Sanders, Murphy said. Real name Blake David Sanders. Served 8 years for armed robbery, got out 18 months ago. But here's the interesting part. His victim was an insurance investigator named Ricky Weaver. Jake studied the articles. Blake had robbed and beaten an investigator who was looking into fraudulent claims. What kind of claims? Auto accidents. Staged crashes. The whole operation was worth millions. Murphy pointed to another article. 3 people went to prison. Blake was the muscle. The picture was getting clearer. Blake had experience with insurance fraud. He shows up in Cedar Falls, moves in with Vanessa, and suddenly there's a convenient accident that pays out $100,000. There's more, Murphy said grimly. I called my cousin who works at the county clerk's office. Guess who filed a restraining order against you 2 weeks before Sarah died? Jake didn't need to guess. Vanessa claimed you were threatening her, and Sarah said you'd become violent and unstable due to PTSD. The order prohibited you from contacting them or coming within 500 feet of the house. That's impossible. I was in a military hospital in Germany. I know, but the paperwork's all there. Filed properly, signed by a judge. And guess who witnessed Vanessa's signature? Blake Sanders. Got it in one. Murphy leaned back in his chair. Jake, they set you up. Made sure you couldn't come home, even if you'd known about Sarah. Jake's hands clenched into fists. The betrayal was deeper than he'd imagined. While he was fighting for his country, his wife and her cousin were planning to steal his life. I need more, Jake said. I need to know exactly what happened the night Sarah died. Already working on it. But Jake. Murphy grabbed his arm. These people are dangerous. Blake's got connections from prison. And if they killed Sarah, then they made the biggest mistake of their lives. Jake left Murphy's diner with a clear mission. He drove to the outskirts of town, to a storage unit he'd rented before his last deployment. Inside were things he'd hoped never to need again, equipment from his military career that wasn't exactly regulation. As he opened the metal door, Jake Mitchell smiled for the first time since coming home. Blake Sanders and Vanessa thought they'd destroyed his life, but they'd only awakened something that should have stayed buried. War was coming to Cedar Falls. Chapter 3, The Infiltration. Jake spent the night in a motel on Route 9, planning his next moves. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of Sarah calling his name. By dawn, he had a strategy. His first stop was the Cedar Falls Police Department. Chief Eric Jordan had been a rookie when Jake left for the military, but now he ran the small force of 8 officers that served the town and surrounding county. Jake Mitchell, Eric said, standing up from his desk. Heard you were back. Sorry about Sarah. Thank you. Jake sat down uninvited. I'd like to see the accident report. Eric hesitated. That's not really. I'm her father. I have a right. Of course. Eric pulled out a file. Though I should mention, the case is closed. Driver pled guilty, got 10 years. Jake studied the report. Tommy Walsh, blood alcohol 0.16, speeding in a residential area. Sarah Michelle Mitchell struck while walking southbound on Maple Street at 8:47 p.m. Multiple injuries, pronounced dead at Cedar Falls General at 11:23 p.m. Says here Sarah was conscious when the paramedics arrived. For about an hour. She kept asking for you. The words hit like bullets, but Jake forced himself to stay focused. Where was she walking from? Report doesn't specify. Vanessa said probably the library. Library closes at 6. Eric looked uncomfortable. Look, Jake, I know this is hard, but sometimes kids lie to their parents about where they're going. Did you investigate where she actually was? We investigated everything relevant to the accident. Tommy was drunk. He hit your daughter. He's in prison. Justice was served. Jake noted the defensive tone. Eric wasn't incompetent, but he wasn't asking the right questions either. Can I talk to Tommy Walsh? He's at Millbrook Correctional. But Jake, what's the point? The kids already confessed. Closure. That afternoon, Jake drove 2 hours to Millbrook. The prison was a concrete monument to human failure, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Jake had been in worse places, but this felt different. Personal. Tommy Walsh was 22, but looked younger. Thin, pale, with nervous eyes that wouldn't meet Jake's gaze. They sat across from each other in the visitor's room, separated by reinforced glass. Mr. Mitchell, Tommy said through the phone. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Tell me what happened. I killed your little girl. I was drunk and I killed her. The words came out like a rehearsed confession. Where had you been drinking? Tommy paused. I don't. It's hard to remember. Try. Roadhouse, I think. Or maybe Murphy's. It's all fuzzy. Jake leaned forward. Tommy, look at me. Really look at me. The young man finally met his eyes. I know you weren't drinking that night. Diana Bird saw you at an AA meeting that afternoon. Tommy's face went white. That's not. I was drunk, sir. I killed your daughter. Who told you to say that? Nobody told me nothing. I remember drinking, and then. Tommy's hands shook. Then there was blood and screaming, and your little girl was. What's the last thing you clearly remember from that night? Tommy was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Leaving the AA meeting, Mike Patterson was giving me a ride home. We stopped at the gas station on Elm Street. I bought a Coke and some chips. What happened after that? I woke up in the hospital. They said I'd been drinking. Said I killed someone. Tommy started crying. But I don't drink anymore, Mr. Mitchell. I swear to God, I don't drink. Jake believed him. Someone had drugged Tommy Walsh, put him behind the wheel, and used him as a weapon to kill Sarah. But who? And why? Tommy, did you know my daughter? Seen her around school. She was younger, real smart. Always reading books. Did you know my wife? Vanessa? No, sir. What about Blake Sanders? Tommy's reaction was immediate and visceral. He jerked back like he'd been struck. I don't know nobody by that name. You're lying. I ain't lying about nothing. But his eyes told a different story. Tommy Walsh knew Blake Sanders, and he was terrified of him. Jake tried a different approach. Who's been visiting you in prison? My mom. My lawyer sometimes. Anyone else? There was a guy couple months ago. Said he was a friend of the family. Big guy, tattoos. Blake. He'd been here, making sure Tommy kept his mouth shut. What did he say? Just that he was sorry about what happened. And that. Tommy swallowed hard. That prison could be dangerous for someone who talked too much. Tommy, listen to me. I'm going to find out what really happened that night. And when I do, I'm going to make sure the people responsible pay for it. You can't help me, sir. Nobody can. Why? Because they'll kill me if I talk. Just like they killed. Tommy caught himself. Just like they killed who? Nobody. I didn't say nothing. But he had said something. Tommy Walsh knew more than he was admitting, and someone had scared him into silence. Driving back to Cedar Falls, Jake's phone rang. Murphy again. Jake, you need to stay away from town tonight. Why? Blake's been asking around about you. He's got some friends coming in from out of state. Word is they're looking to have a conversation. Jake smiled grimly. What kind of friends? The kind that carry guns and don't ask questions. I'm serious, Jake. These boys are professionals. Thanks for the warning. You're not going to listen, are you? Not a chance. Jake hung up and pulled over at a truck stop. From his duffel bag, he retrieved items he'd collected from the storage unit that morning. Body armor, night vision goggles, and a tactical knife that had saved his life in Afghanistan. If Blake Sanders wanted a war, Jake Mitchell would give him one. That evening, Jake parked his truck 3 blocks from his old house and approached on foot. The military had taught him patience, and he used those skills now, observing from the shadows. Blake's friends had arrived, 3 men in a black SUV with out-of-state plates. Through the living room window, Jake could see them drinking beer and playing cards. Vanessa was nowhere in sight. Jake circled the property, noting exits and sight lines. The security system was still disabled, and Blake had made no effort to secure the perimeter. Amateurs. At 11 p.m., 2 of the men left in the SUV. Blake and the remaining man settled in to wait. They were expecting Jake to come through the front door like an angry husband. They weren't expecting a soldier. Jake entered through the basement window he'd used as a teenager sneaking out. The house was dark except for the living room, where Blake and his friend were watching TV. Jake moved through the shadows, every step calculated. The gun safe had been moved, but not emptied. Blake hadn't found Jake's emergency cache, a .45 pistol taped under the basement stairs. Jake retrieved it and checked the load. 7 rounds. More than enough. He climbed the stairs silently, staying in the darkness. From the kitchen, he could hear Blake and his friend talking. Should have been here by now, the friend was saying. Maybe he ain't stupid enough to come. He'll come, Blake replied. Man finds out his wife's been playing house with another guy, he's gonna want blood. What if he calls the cops? Blake laughed. Cops ain't gonna help him. Half of them owe me favors. Corruption. Another piece of the puzzle. Blake had connections in the police department, which explained why the investigation into Sarah's death had been so superficial. Jake stepped into the living room. You're right. I did want blood. Both men spun around. Blake reached for a gun on the coffee table, but Jake was faster. The .45 was aimed at Blake's head before he could move. Don't, Jake said quietly. Blake's friend started to stand, but Jake shifted the gun toward him. Sit down, hands where I can see them. The man complied. Blake tried to look defiant, but Jake could see the fear in his eyes. Where's Vanessa? Upstairs, sleeping. She don't know nothing about this. About what? Your plan to rob me? Or your plan to kill my daughter? Blake's mask slipped for just a moment. Long enough for Jake to see the truth. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. You and Vanessa needed money. The insurance policy on Sarah was the perfect score. All you needed was an accident. You're crazy. Maybe. But I'm also right. Jake moved closer. Tommy Walsh wasn't drunk that night. You drugged him, put him behind the wheel, and pointed him at my daughter. Prove it. I will. But first, you're going to tell me exactly how you did it. Blake tried to bluster. You ain't gonna shoot me. You're too much of a Boy Scout. Jake smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Blake, I've killed 17 men in the service of my country. Patriots fighting for their beliefs. What do you think I'll do to a piece of trash who murdered my little girl? The gun never wavered. Chapter 4. The Pressure. Blake Sanders had faced armed robbery charges, prison gangs, and parole officers, but Jake Mitchell was something different. The man standing in his living room wasn't just angry. He was coldly, methodically furious. Blake had seen that look before, in the eyes of inmates who'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. You got no proof of nothing, Blake said, but his voice lacked conviction. I don't need proof for what I'm planning. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. I need confessions. Blake's friend, a thin man with prison tattoos named Kelvin Hess, spoke up. Look, mister, I don't know what's going on here, but I ain't part of. Shut up, Kelvin, Blake snapped. Mistake. Jake now had a name. Kelvin Hess. 2 strikes for armed robbery in Alabama, 1 for assault with a deadly weapon in Georgia. What brings you to Cedar Falls, Kelvin? Kelvin's eyes widened. How do you? I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. Jake had spent the afternoon running background checks through his military contacts. Blake's associates were exactly what he'd expected, career criminals with nothing to lose. Blake owes me money, Kelvin said quickly. That's all. This ain't my beef. Then you can leave. Jake didn't take his eyes off Blake. Get in your car and drive back to Alabama. Forget you were ever here. Kelvin looked at Blake, who nodded reluctantly. Go on. I'll handle this. After Kelvin left, the house fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock, a wedding gift from Jake's parents. Everything in this room had once meant something to him. Now it was just a stage for the reckoning. Just you and me now, Jake said. What do you want? The truth. All of it. How you met Vanessa, when you started planning this, how you killed my daughter. Blake tried a different approach. Look, soldier boy, you got this all wrong. I love Vanessa. I'd never hurt that kid. You called her that kid. Not Sarah. Not my daughter. She was just an obstacle to you. That ain't. Footsteps on the stairs interrupted them. Vanessa appeared in her bathrobe, hair disheveled. When she saw Jake with the gun, she didn't scream or panic. She sighed. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Her calm admission stunned even Blake. Vanessa, don't say nothing. Why not? It's over, Blake. Look at him. He knows everything. Jake studied his wife, ex-wife, as if seeing her for the first time. The woman he'd married was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. How long have you been planning this? Vanessa sat down on the couch next to Blake, taking his hand. Since your second deployment. You were never here, Jake. Never really present even when you were home. Sarah needed a father, and I needed a husband. So you decided to kill her? We decided to collect the insurance money and start over. The kid. Vanessa's voice caught slightly. The kid was supposed to be at her friend's house that night. It was just bad luck. Jake's world tilted. They hadn't specifically targeted Sarah. She'd been collateral damage in their scheme to fake an accident for the insurance money. Somehow, that made it worse. Whose idea was it? Blake and Vanessa exchanged glances. Mine, Vanessa admitted. Blake was getting out of prison, needed money to start over. I was drowning in debt from your medical bills, the mortgage, everything. My medical bills. The VA don't cover everything, Jake. You left me with $20,000 in debt and a daughter to raise alone. Jake felt a flicker of doubt. He'd thought the military insurance covered everything. But even if Vanessa was telling the truth about the money, it didn't justify murder. So you decided to stage a car accident. Blake knew how from his previous work. We just needed a fall guy. Vanessa's voice turned bitter. Tommy Walsh was perfect. Kid with a record, nobody would question it. How did you drug him? Blake finally spoke up. Rohypnol and his coke at the gas station. I followed him from the AA meeting, waited for him to stop. Slipped it into his drink while he was paying. Then what? Waited for it to kick in. Kid started swerving, pulled over. I dragged him out, put him in the passenger seat, got behind the wheel myself. Jake's grip on the gun tightened. You drove the truck that killed Sarah. Was supposed to hit the mailbox, make it look like a drunk driving accident with property damage. Collect on the insurance, split the money. Blake's voice was flat, emotionless. Kid walking down the street wasn't part of the plan. But you saw her. Yeah. And you didn't stop. Blake was quiet for a long moment. By then, it was too late to stop. Kid had seen the truck, might have recognized it. And Vanessa said. I said we were in too deep, Vanessa finished. If we backed out then, we'd have nothing. But if we went through with it, the insurance money would solve all our problems. Jake stared at the woman he'd once loved. She'd ordered the death of their daughter for money. Not in a moment of passion or panic, but as a cold business decision. How much, he asked. 100,000. Plus the house, once you were declared legally dead. Legally dead? Vanessa smiled. You're unstable, Jake. PTSD, violent tendencies. The restraining order proves it. When you inevitably do something terrible, like breaking into our house with a gun, we'll have to defend ourselves. Jake understood. This wasn't just about the insurance money. They were planning to kill him too, claim self-defense, and inherit everything he'd worked for. One problem with your plan, Jake said. What's that? I'm not the same man who left for Afghanistan. Jake had been thinking while they talked, planning his next moves. Blake and Vanessa had confessed to murdering Sarah, but confessions obtained at gunpoint weren't admissible in court. He needed evidence, witnesses, something that would hold up in a legal proceeding. But more than that, he needed justice. Real justice, not the sanitized version offered by courts and lawyers. Here's what's going to happen, Jake said. You're going to write down everything you just told me. Every detail of how you killed my daughter. Like hell, Blake said. Jake fired a shot into the wall next to Blake's head. The sound was deafening in the small room. That was a warning. The next one won't be. Vanessa was shaking now, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Jake, please. I know this looks bad, but it looks like murder. Because that's what it is. Jake pulled out his phone and started recording. Blake Sanders, you are going to repeat what you just told me about the night Sarah Mitchell died. I ain't saying nothing. Jake shot the lamp next to Blake's chair. Ceramic exploded across the room. Blake David Sanders, for the murder of Sarah Michelle Mitchell, you are hereby sentenced to death. You can't just. I'm not a court of law, Blake. I'm something much worse. I'm a father who lost his daughter to scum like you. Blake looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run. What do you want? Justice. And I'm going to get it, one way or another. Jake's phone buzzed. A text message from Murphy. Police are on their way. Blake called them before you got there. A setup. They'd been expecting him, had planned to provoke him into doing something that would justify their self-defense claim. But Jake had survived 3 tours of combat by being 3 steps ahead of his enemies. Vanessa, call the police. Tell them it was a false alarm. I'm not. Jake pointed the gun at her. Call them. Now. With shaking hands, Vanessa dialed 911. This is Vanessa Mitchell at 1247 Elm Street. I called earlier about an intruder, but it was a mistake. Everything's fine here. Jake listened to make sure she canceled the call properly. He had maybe 10 minutes before the police arrived anyway. Small-town cops were thorough, if nothing else. Blake, you and I are going for a ride. Where? Jake smiled. To see some old friends. He forced Blake at gunpoint out to the truck, leaving Vanessa cable-tied to a chair in the living room. She'd be found by the police, but Jake would be long gone by then. As they drove through the dark streets of Cedar Falls, Blake kept asking where they were going. Jake didn't answer. He was thinking about justice, about revenge, and about the difference between the two. By the time the sun rose, Blake Sanders would understand that difference. Chapter 5, The Reckoning. Jake drove Blake to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a relic from Cedar Falls' brief industrial period. The building had been empty for a decade, its windows broken and its loading docks overgrown with weeds. Perfect for what Jake had in mind. What is this place? Blake asked as they pulled up. Your courtroom. Jake had chosen the location carefully. No neighbors, no surveillance cameras, no chance of interruption. He'd also made some preparations. Earlier that day, he'd brought equipment from his storage unit and set up what he needed. Inside the warehouse, Jake had arranged a single chair in the center of the vast empty space. Floodlights mounted on tripods illuminated the area like a stage. A video camera on a tripod pointed at the chair. Sit down, Jake ordered. Blake hesitated. Look, man, whatever you're planning. Sit down. The gun made the argument more persuasive. Blake sat. Jake activated the camera and the lights. State your name for the record. I ain't saying nothing without a lawyer. This isn't a legal proceeding, Blake. This is something much older. Trial by combat, except you don't get to fight back. Jake had spent hours planning this moment. The military had taught him that information was a weapon, and he intended to use every piece he'd gathered. Let's start with your real relationship to Vanessa. She's my cousin. Bullshit. I ran your DNA through military databases. Vanessa isn't your cousin. She's your half-sister. Blake's face went white. That ain't. Same father, different mothers. Robert Sanders got around, didn't he? Left a trail of bastard children across 3 states. Jake consulted a manila folder. You found Vanessa 2 years ago through one of those ancestry websites. Decided she was the perfect mark for a long con. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, Blake. I know you've been planning this since before you got out of prison. I know you researched my deployments, my medical coverage, my insurance policies. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a carefully planned operation. Jake pulled out a stack of papers. Bank records. Vanessa's been sending you money for 18 months, ever since you contacted her. Phone records show hundreds of calls between you two. And here's the interesting part. Those calls started before I deployed for the 3rd time. Blake's confidence was cracking. Jake could see it in his posture, in the way his eyes darted around looking for escape routes. But the real evidence is this. Jake held up a traffic camera screenshot. Route 9, the night Sarah died. Your truck, clearly visible, heading toward Maple Street at 8:30 p.m. That don't prove nothing. It proves you lied about the timeline. You said you put Tommy behind the wheel and let him drive. But this shows your truck 20 minutes before the accident, with you driving. Jake had spent the morning with Murphy, who'd called in favors to get the traffic footage. The image was grainy but clear enough to identify Blake behind the wheel. You want to know what really happened that night? Jake activated the video camera. Here's what the evidence shows. Jake laid out the timeline piece by piece. Blake had followed Tommy from the AA meeting, drugged his drink at the gas station, then waited for the Rohypnol to take effect. When Tommy pulled over, Blake had loaded the unconscious young man into the passenger seat and driven toward the accident site. But Sarah wasn't supposed to be there, Jake continued. She was supposed to be at Angelica Bray's house, Diana Bird's great-niece. You'd been watching her patterns, knew her schedule. Except that night, Angelica was sick. Sarah left the library and started walking home. Blake was sweating now, despite the cool air in the warehouse. You saw her on Maple Street. Had two choices, abort the mission or go through with it. And you chose murder. I told you it was an accident. No, Blake. This is what convinced me it was intentional. Jake pulled out another photograph. Sarah's body. You want to see what you did to my daughter? I don't. Look at it. Jake shoved the crime scene photo in front of Blake's face. The image was horrible, Sarah's small body broken on the asphalt, her school books scattered around her. The impact pattern shows you accelerated before hitting her. Didn't try to brake or swerve. You aimed that truck at my little girl and floored it. Blake was crying now, but Jake felt no sympathy. Then you dragged Tommy behind the wheel, poured bourbon down his throat to mask the Rohypnol, and called 911. Perfect crime, except for one thing. What? You underestimated how much I loved my daughter. Jake walked to a workbench and picked up a crowbar. Sarah was 8 years old. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She collected stamps and read books about horses. She made me Father's Day cards every year, even when I was deployed. Please. She died calling my name. Vanessa told me that, thinking it would hurt. But you know what? It gave me purpose. My daughter's last words were calling for her daddy to save her. I wasn't there then, but I'm here now. Jake tested the weight of the crowbar. I could kill you right now. Claim self-defense, say you tried to escape. Who's going to question the word of a decorated war veteran over a convicted felon? But you won't, Blake said desperately. You're not a killer. You're wrong about that. I've killed plenty of people. Difference is, they were soldiers fighting for their country. You're just vermin. Jake set the crowbar aside and pulled out his phone. But you're right about one thing. I'm not going to kill you. That would be too quick, too merciful. He dialed a number. Murphy? It's Jake. Yeah, I need you to make that call. No, he's ready to talk. Bring the others. Blake looked confused. What others? Well, Blake, it turns out you've made quite a few enemies over the years. And when word gets out about what you did to an 8-year-old girl. Jake shrugged. Let's just say the prison system isn't kind to child killers. 20 minutes later, Murphy arrived with Chief Eric Jordan and 2 other men Jake didn't recognize. One wore a federal marshal's badge. The other was clearly a lawyer. Blake Sanders, the marshal said. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, tampering with evidence, and the murder of Sarah Michelle Mitchell. I want a lawyer. You've got one, the lawyer said. I'm Mike Patterson, public defender. I'm here to make sure your confession is properly recorded. Blake looked around wildly. What confession? I ain't confessed to nothing. Jake smiled. Actually, you have. He held up his phone. I've been recording this entire conversation. Your detailed description of how you drugged Tommy Walsh, drove the truck that killed Sarah, and staged the accident. All on video, with perfect audio quality. That ain't legal. You coerced me. Actually, the lawyer said, it's perfectly admissible. You weren't in police custody. Mr. Mitchell identified himself as a private citizen, and you voluntarily provided the information. The recording is clean. Jake had planned this carefully. Every step had been designed to build an airtight case that would put Blake away forever. But here's the beauty of it, Jake continued. You're not just going down for Sarah's murder. I've been busy today. He handed Chief Jordan another folder. Blake's fingerprints, DNA, and detailed confession to the armed robbery of insurance investigator Ricky Weaver 8 years ago. Turns out there were other victims too. Cases that went unsolved because Blake was careful. Until now. Blake's face went ashen. You can't. I already did. Federal prosecutors are very interested in your little insurance fraud ring. Seems you and your associates have been busy. The Sarah Mitchell case was just the tip of the iceberg. The marshal stepped forward with handcuffs. Blake David Sanders, you have the right to remain silent. As they read Blake his rights, Jake felt a strange sense of completion. Justice wasn't revenge, it was seeing the system work the way it was supposed to. Blake would spend the rest of his life in prison, and everyone would know exactly what kind of monster he was. What about Vanessa? Chief Jordan asked. She's waiting at the house, Jake said. Probably still tied to a chair. You assaulted her? I restrained a suspect who was threatening to flee. She confessed to conspiracy in the murder of my daughter. I suggest you hurry before she decides to change her story. As the police cars pulled away with Blake in custody, Murphy put a hand on Jake's shoulder. How does it feel? Jake thought about that. The rage was still there, the grief was still crushing, but something else had changed. Like the war's not over yet. What do you mean? Blake was just the muscle. Vanessa was the brains. And she's about to learn that I fight differently than her boyfriend. Murphy looked worried. Jake, she's already caught. The case is solved. The legal case is solved. But there's still the matter of personal justice. What are you planning? Jake smiled, but there was no warmth in it. To finish what I started. Chapter 6, The Unraveling. While Blake Sanders was being processed at the county jail, Jake returned to his house on Elm Street. Police cars filled the driveway, their red and blue lights painting the white colonial in garish colors. Through the living room window, he could see Vanessa talking to detectives, playing the role of the grieving widow who'd been victimized by her violent ex-husband. Jake parked across the street and watched. Vanessa had always been a gifted actress. It's how she'd convinced him to marry her, how she'd hidden her true nature for 15 years. But Jake knew her tricks now. His phone rang. Chief Jordan. Jake, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? Vanessa's claiming you broke into the house, threatened her and Blake, forced confessions at gunpoint. She's saying everything on your recording was coerced under duress. Jake had expected this. What about Blake's confession? He's lawyered up, claiming the same thing. Says you tortured him to get him to admit to things he didn't do. And you believe them? I believe the evidence. But without Blake's confession, we've got traffic camera footage and circumstantial evidence. Might not be enough for first-degree murder. Jake's blood ran cold. After everything he'd done, Blake might walk on a technicality. There's more, Chief Jordan continued. Vanessa's filed charges against you. Breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping. DA's talking about issuing a warrant. On whose testimony? Hers. And she's got physical evidence. The bullet holes in your living room wall, cable ties around her wrists when we found her. Jake closed his eyes. He'd been outmaneuvered. While he was focused on getting Blake to confess, Vanessa had been setting up a counterattack. Chief, that woman murdered my daughter. I know you believe that, Jake. But believing it and proving it are different things. Jake hung up and sat in his truck, thinking. Vanessa was smarter than he'd given her credit for. She'd let Blake take the fall for the actual killing while positioning herself as another victim. Classic manipulation. She'd probably been planning this contingency from the beginning. But Jake Mitchell hadn't survived 3 combat tours by giving up when the mission got complicated. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Sarah's grave in 1 hour. Come alone. V. Vanessa wanted to negotiate. That was interesting. Jake drove to Cedar Falls Cemetery as the sun set behind the pine trees. Vanessa was already there, standing next to Sarah's headstone with her back to him. She wore a black dress, the same one she'd worn to their wedding. Hello, Jake. Vanessa. She turned to face him. Up close, he could see the lines around her eyes, the hard set of her mouth. Prison would age her even more. Nice performance for the police, Jake said. I learned from the best. You were always good at telling people what they wanted to hear. Is that what you think I did? Isn't it? The noble soldier, fighting for God and country? Meanwhile, your daughter was home asking why Daddy didn't love her anymore. Jake felt the barb hit home. I was serving my country. You were running away. From responsibility, from Sarah, from me. The military was just an excuse to abandon your family. I never abandoned anyone. No? When's the last time you were home for Sarah's birthday? Her school play? Parent-teacher conferences? Vanessa's voice turned bitter. I raised that girl alone for 3 years while you played war in the desert. Jake wanted to argue, but part of him knew she was right. He'd thrown himself into military service as much to escape domestic pressures as to serve his country. That doesn't justify what you did. What I did was survive. You left me with 20,000 in debt, a daughter to raise, and no way to make ends meet. Blake offered a solution. Blake offered murder. Blake offered money. The plan was never to hurt Sarah. Jake studied Vanessa's face, looking for tells. She was lying, not about the plan going wrong, but about something else. What do you want, Vanessa? To make a deal. What kind of deal? I'll testify against Blake, give you everything you need to put him away for life. In exchange, you drop the charges against me. I didn't file the charges, but you could make them go away. One word from the grieving father about how I was coerced, how I was just another victim of Blake's manipulation. Jake almost laughed. You want me to help you frame Blake for something you planned together? I want us to both walk away from this alive. There was something in her tone, a threat wrapped in reasonable words. What's that supposed to mean? Blake's got friends, Jake. The kind who don't care about legal proceedings. You put him in prison, they're going to come looking for payback. Let them come. What about me? You think I'm going to prison quietly? I know things about you, Jake. Things from before you deployed. Jake felt a chill. What things? The night you broke Steve Albert's ribs outside Murphy's diner. The time you put Joel McDowell in the hospital for flirting with me. You think the military knows about your anger management issues? She was right. Jake had a history of violence that predated his military service. If prosecutors dug into his background, they'd find a pattern that would support Vanessa's claims about PTSD and instability. You're bluffing. Am I? Or am I the woman who's kept your secrets for 15 years? Who covered for you when you lost control? Vanessa stepped closer. I know you, Jake, better than you know yourself. And I know you won't let Blake walk free, even if it means destroying both of us. She was manipulating him again, pushing his buttons the way she always had. But this time, Jake was ready for it. You're right about one thing, he said. I won't let Blake walk. Then we have a deal? No, we have a problem. Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. A recording app had been running throughout their conversation. You just admitted to planning the insurance fraud. Admitted that Blake was offering a solution to your money problems. Admitted you know things about his criminal associates. Vanessa's face went white. That's entrapment. No, that's evidence. And unlike our previous conversation, this one happened in public, between two private citizens, with no coercion involved. You son of a bitch. I learned from the best. Jake pocketed the phone. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to prison, Blake's going to prison, and everyone who helped you is going to pay. The only question is whether you want to cooperate or fight. And if I fight, then I stop playing by the rules. Vanessa stared at him for a long moment. You've changed. War does that to people. This isn't over, Jake. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. Vanessa walked away without another word, her heels clicking on the cemetery's gravel path. Jake stayed by Sarah's grave until the stars came out, talking to his daughter for the first time since coming home. I'm sorry I wasn't there, baby girl. But Daddy's home now, and I'm going to make sure the people who hurt you pay for what they did. The wind rustled through the pine trees, and for a moment, Jake could almost hear Sarah's voice calling his name. When he finally returned to his truck, Jake found a note under the windshield wiper. Your daughter died screaming. You're next. Blake's friends had made their move. The war was escalating. Jake crumpled the note and smiled. He'd been hoping for an excuse to take the gloves off. Chapter 7. The War Begins. Jake didn't go back to the motel that night. Instead, he drove to his storage unit and retrieved the rest of his gear, body armor, night vision equipment, and weapons that weren't quite legal for civilian use. If Blake's associates wanted a war, they'd get one. His first stop was Murphy's diner. At 3 a.m., the place was closed, but Murphy lived in the apartment upstairs. Jake used the fire escape to reach the back window, then picked the lock with tools he'd learned to use in Afghanistan. Jesus Christ, Jake. Murphy nearly fell out of bed when Jake materialized in his bedroom. You trying to give me a heart attack? Get dressed. We need to talk. They went downstairs to the diner's kitchen. Murphy made coffee while Jake spread photos across the prep table, surveillance shots he'd taken earlier that evening. Blake's friends are making their move, Jake explained. 3 men in a black Escalade, Tennessee plates. They've been watching the police station, the courthouse, and my motel. How do you know? Because I've been watching them watch me. Jake had spent hours in the shadows, using skills the military had honed to perfection. They're professionals, but they're not soldiers. Private security, maybe former cops. Murphy studied the photos. What do you want from me? Information. You know everyone in this town. Hear all the gossip. I need to know who else Blake was working with locally. Jake, these people already killed your daughter. You keep pushing, they might. They might what? Kill me too. Jake's eyes were hard. Let them try. Murphy sighed and poured 2 cups of coffee. There's been talk. People Blake was paying for favors. Nothing I could prove, but who? Deputy Dean Burton, for one. Blake's been buying him drinks at the Roadhouse, slipping him cash. Word is Burton's been tipping him off about police investigations. A corrupt cop. That explained how Blake had stayed ahead of any serious scrutiny. Anyone else? Christoph Walsh, Tommy's uncle, owns the gas station where Tommy bought the coke. Christoph's been acting nervous ever since the arrest, asking questions about what Tommy might have said. Jake filed the information away. What about the accident investigation? Any irregularities? Well, the blood work on Tommy came back showing rohypnol, but it was buried in the report. Prosecutors said it wasn't relevant since Tommy had alcohol in his system too. Buried by who? DA's office. Nick Powers handled the case personally, rushed it through the system faster than anyone expected. District Attorney Nick Powers. Jake had gone to high school with him, a political climber who'd always taken shortcuts when he thought no one was looking. Murphy, I need you to do something for me. What? Call your cousin at the county clerk's office. I need copies of all the paperwork related to Vanessa's restraining order. Every document, every signature, every filing date. Why? Because I think the corruption goes deeper than Blake and Vanessa. And if I'm right, this whole case is about to explode. Murphy made the call. An hour later, they met his cousin Bernice Hansen in the parking lot behind the courthouse. Bernice was nervous, kept looking around like she expected to be arrested. This is highly irregular, she said, handing Jake a manila envelope. If anyone finds out I gave you these files. They won't, Jake assured her. What can you tell me about them? The restraining order was filed 3 weeks before Sarah's death, not 2 weeks like you were told. It was expedited through the system, processed in record time. Jake opened the envelope and studied the documents. Vanessa's signature looked right, but something about the judge's approval bothered him. Who signed off on this? Judge Muhammad Patterson. But here's the weird part. He was on vacation that week. Fishing trip to Lake Superior, I verified it myself. Then who approved the order? According to the timestamp, he did. But Patterson swears he never saw the paperwork. Forged judicial approval. Someone with access to the court system had backdated the order to make it look legitimate. Bernice, who else has access to Judge Patterson's electronic signature? Just his clerk and the DA's office for routine matters. Nick Powers again. Jake was starting to see the full scope of the conspiracy. Thank you, he told Bernice. And remember, you never saw me tonight. After Bernice left, Jake sat in his truck studying the documents. The restraining order wasn't just part of Vanessa and Blake's plan. It was part of a larger cover-up involving multiple people in positions of authority. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mitchell. You've been asking questions, a voice said. Male, older, with a slight accent. That's not healthy. Who is this? Someone who's been watching you make mistakes. Your daughter's dead, your wife's moved on, and you're tilting at windmills. Time to accept reality and move on. The reality is that my daughter was murdered, and I'm going to find everyone responsible. Even if it gets you killed? Especially then. The line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, thinking. The caller had known about his investigation, which meant someone was feeding information to Blake's associates. But who? Jake's answer came 20 minutes later when he spotted headlights in his rearview mirror. The black Escalade was following him, maintaining distance but definitely tracking his movements. Instead of leading them away from populated areas, Jake drove straight toward the center of town. If they wanted a confrontation, he'd give them one where there would be witnesses. He parked in front of the police station and got out, making sure the security cameras caught his face. The Escalade drove past without stopping, but Jake got a clear look at the occupants. 3 men, all wearing dark clothing, all armed. Jake walked into the police station. The night desk sergeant looked up in surprise. Mr. Mitchell, what can I do for you? I'd like to report a threat against my life. What kind of threat? Jake showed him the note from his windshield and played the recording of the phone call. I believe these threats are related to my daughter's murder case. The sergeant took notes and promised to file a report. Jake knew it wouldn't lead to any immediate action, but it established an official record. If something happened to him, investigators would know where to start looking. Outside the police station, Jake's phone buzzed with a text. Smart move. But it won't save you. They were still watching. Jake looked around, using reflection in storefront windows to scan for surveillance. The Escalade was parked 2 blocks away, engine running. Jake walked to his truck and drove home, not to the motel, but to his actual house on Elm Street. The police tape was gone, and Vanessa's car wasn't in the driveway. She was probably staying with friends or family while the investigation continued. Jake parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen door. The house felt alien now, contaminated by Blake's presence and Vanessa's betrayal. But it was still his house, bought with his military pay and filled with memories of Sarah. He went to Sarah's room first. It was exactly as she'd left it, bed unmade, books scattered across the desk, stuffed animals arranged on the windowsill. Vanessa hadn't touched anything, probably couldn't bear to clean it out. Jake sat on Sarah's bed and picked up one of her books, a story about a girl who could talk to horses. Sarah had read it dozens of times, always imagining herself as the protagonist. Now she'd never finish the series, never grow up to become the veterinarian she'd dreamed of being. The anger came back, pure and focused. Blake and Vanessa hadn't just killed his daughter. They'd murdered her future, stolen all the moments they would have shared. Jake opened his laptop and began typing. If the system was corrupted, if the authorities couldn't be trusted, then he'd have to find another way to get justice. He started with social media, creating anonymous accounts and posting the evidence he'd gathered. Photos of Blake's truck at the accident scene, recordings of Vanessa's confessions, documentation of the forged restraining order. Within hours, the story was spreading across local Facebook groups and Twitter feeds. Next, he sent packages to journalists at 3 major newspapers, including copies of all his evidence and detailed explanations of the conspiracy. Even if the local authorities tried to suppress the story, it would be harder to silence the press. Finally, Jake called his former commanding officer, Colonel Steve Albert. "Jake Mitchell," the colonel said. "Heard you were back stateside. How's the arm? Healing?" "Steve, I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that involves people who killed a soldier's daughter and think they're going to get away with it." There was a long pause. "Jake, you know I can't get involved in civilian law enforcement." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to make some phone calls. Let certain people know that Jake Mitchell has friends who take these things personally." Another pause. "I'll see what I can do." "Thanks, Steve. And if something happens to me, make sure the story gets out." "Nothing's going to happen to you, Jake. You're too mean to die." Jake hoped he was right. But as he hung up the phone, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the front door opening. Someone was in the house. Chapter 8, The Final Battle. Jake drew his pistol and moved silently toward the living room. The front door stood open, and he could hear voices, 2 men, speaking in low tones. They weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted him to know they were there. "Mr. Mitchell," one of them called out. "We'd like to have a conversation." Jake recognized the voice from the phone call. He stayed in the shadows, assessing the situation. 2 hostiles in the living room, possibly more outside. His broken arm limited his mobility, but the house gave him a tactical advantage. He knew every sight line, every piece of cover. "Come on out, Mitchell. We're not here to hurt you. Just want to talk." Jake almost laughed. Armed men breaking into his house at midnight weren't there for conversation. "What do you want to talk about?" Jake called back. "Your future, and how to make sure you have one." "I'm listening. Face to face. Come out where we can see you." Jake had a better idea. He slipped upstairs to Sarah's room and looked out the window. The black Escalade was in his driveway, but he couldn't see a third man. Either they'd only brought 2, or the third was positioned somewhere Jake couldn't spot him. "Time's up, Mitchell," the voice called. "We're coming to find you." Footsteps on the stairs. Jake positioned himself behind Sarah's door, pistol ready. He'd been in worse situations in Afghanistan, but this felt different, more personal. The first man appeared in the hallway, tall, lean, moving like a professional. Jake let him pass Sarah's room, then stepped out behind him. "Drop your weapon." The man spun around, but Jake was faster. The pistol but caught him in the temple, dropping him instantly. "Danny," The second man called from downstairs. Everything okay up there? Jake dragged the unconscious man into Sarah's room and zip-tied his hands with restraints from his tactical kit. The man's wallet identified him as Daniel Burton, probably related to Deputy Dean Burton. Family connections. The corruption ran deeper than Jake had imagined. Danny, the second man, was coming upstairs now. Jake positioned himself at the top of the staircase. When the man's head appeared, Jake grabbed him and used his momentum to slam him into the wall. The impact was loud enough to wake the dead, but this wasn't a neighborhood where people called the police for every noise. The second man, according to his ID, Eric Ellis, was bigger than his partner. He fought back, landing a solid punch to Jake's injured arm. The pain was excruciating, but Jake had fought through worse. Jake kneed Ellis in the solar plexus, then drove his elbow into the man's throat. Ellis went down gasping. "That's two," Jake said, zip-tying Ellis. "Where's number 3? Ellis glared at him, but didn't answer. Jake searched both men, finding pistols, cash, and burner phones. Professional equipment for professional thugs. Jake's phone rang. Unknown number. "Impressive work," the voice said. Jake looked out the window and saw a figure standing across the street, backlit by a street lamp. "But you missed one. Who are you?" "Someone who appreciates talent. You could have killed both my men, but you chose restraint. That shows character. What do you want?" "To offer you a deal. Walk away from all this, and your problems disappear. Keep pushing, and things get complicated." "Define complicated." "Your ex-wife has a sister in Phoenix. Nice woman, 2 kids. Would hate for anything to happen to them." Jake's blood turned to ice. They were threatening innocent people now. "I don't negotiate with terrorists." "Then you're a fool. But a predictable one." The line went dead. Jake looked out the window, but the figure was gone. Jake called Chief Jordan. "I need police at 1247 Elm Street. 2 armed intruders, both restrained." "Are you injured?" "No, but they threatened my family. This is connected to Sarah's case." "Stay put. We're on our way." While waiting for the police, Jake questioned his prisoners. Ellis remained silent, but Burton was more talkative. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Burton said. "Blake was small time. The people behind this have reach." "What people?" "Insurance companies. Politicians. People who make millions off staged accidents and fraudulent claims." Jake was starting to understand. Sarah's murder wasn't an isolated crime. It was part of a larger operation involving systematic insurance fraud. How many accidents? Dozens. Maybe hundreds over the years. Always looked legitimate. Always involved expendable people like Tommy Walsh. "Who runs it?" Burton hesitated. "I tell you that, I'm a dead man." "You're already a dead man. Question is whether you want to die for something or die for nothing." Burton looked around Sarah's room. The books, the stuffed animals, the posters of horses on the walls. Kid didn't deserve this. No, she didn't. Nick Powers. District Attorney Nick Powers. He's been covering for the operation for years, making sure cases get buried or rushed through the system. Jake had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still hit hard. The man responsible for prosecuting criminals was actually protecting them. Anyone else? Judge Patterson's in on it too, though he might not know the full scope. And there's someone higher up the food chain, someone who coordinates everything. Who? I don't know. We just got orders through Blake. But whoever it is, they've got connections everywhere. Police, courts, state government. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Chief Jordan looked around the house with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Jake, this can't continue. These vigilante tactics are making things worse." "Making things worse for who?" "The people who killed my daughter." "For everyone. Including you." Jake handed over his recordings of Burton's confession. "Nick Powers is dirty. The whole case against Blake is compromised because the DA's office is part of the conspiracy. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Burton just confessed to being part of an insurance fraud ring that's been operating for years." Chief Jordan looked skeptical. "Confession obtained under duress." "No duress. I offered him protection in exchange for information. That's standard police procedure." "You're not police." "No, I'm something better. I'm someone who can't be bought." Chief Jordan arrested Burton and Ellis, but Jake could see the doubt in his eyes. A conspiracy involving the district attorney would require state or federal intervention, resources the small Cedar Falls Police Department didn't have. After the police left, Jake sat in Sarah's room and thought about what Burton had told him. A network of corruption stretching from petty criminals like Blake all the way up to elected officials. Sarah had died not for a simple insurance scam, but as part of a machine that turned human lives into profit margins. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Albert. Cavalry's coming. Federal task force will be in touch tomorrow. The military was keeping its promise. But Jake wasn't sure he could wait for federal intervention. The people responsible for Sarah's death were still free, still profiting from their crimes. Jake made a decision that would have consequences for years to come. He was done playing by rules written by corrupt officials. It was time to end this war on his terms. He opened his laptop and began typing a message that would change everything. Chapter 9, Justice Served. Jake's message was simple and devastating. He uploaded everything to WikiLeaks, the anonymous tip lines of every major news network, and the FBI's public corruption hotline. Photos, recordings, financial documents, and a detailed timeline showing how a network of criminals had operated under the protection of corrupt officials. But Jake wasn't finished. He had one more move to make. At 6 a.m., Jake drove to Nick Power's house in the wealthy section of Cedar Falls. The district attorney lived in a colonial mansion that cost 3 times his government salary, a red flag that should have attracted attention years ago. Jake didn't break in. He simply rang the doorbell and waited. Nick Powers answered the door in a bathrobe, looking like he'd aged a decade since Jake had last seen him. The arrogant politician from high school had been replaced by a nervous man with haunted eyes. Jake Mitchell, I heard you were back in town. Hello, Nick. We need to talk. About what? About my daughter. About Blake Sanders. About how you've been covering up insurance fraud for profit. Nick's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. You rushed Blake's case through the system, buried evidence about the Rohypnol and Tommy Walsh's blood work, and approved a forged restraining order to keep me away from the investigation. You can't prove any of that. Jake held up his phone. Actually, I can. Daniel Burton sang like a canary last night. Told me all about your arrangement with the insurance fraud ring. Nick looked around nervously, as if expecting to see surveillance teams. Jake, you don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You've been taking money to protect criminals. And one of those criminals murdered my 8-year-old daughter. The kid's death was an accident. Blake was never supposed to. Nick caught himself, but it was too late. He'd just admitted knowing the details of the conspiracy. Tell me how it worked, Jake said. I can't. There are people involved who what? Who'll kill you if you talk. They're already planning to kill you, Nick. I'm offering you a chance to survive this. Nick looked at Jake for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in. They sat in Nick's study, surrounded by law books and framed degrees. The irony wasn't lost on Jake, a man sworn to uphold justice explaining how he'd betrayed everything he claimed to represent. It started small, Nick said, just looking the other way on minor insurance claims. Fender benders that maybe weren't quite accidents, that kind of thing. Who recruited you? A lawyer from Chicago. Ricky Weaver, the same guy Blake robbed years ago. Turns out Weaver wasn't investigating insurance fraud. He was running it. The pieces clicked into place. Blake hadn't robbed an innocent investigator. He'd robbed his boss. That's how he'd ended up in prison and why he'd been recruited back into the operation after his release. How did it escalate to murder? It didn't. Not intentionally. Nick poured himself a whiskey despite the early hour. The plan was to stage a simple drunk driving accident, collect the insurance money, and move on. Sarah being there was. He shrugged helplessly. Was what? Bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. Jake's vision tunneled. You're talking about my daughter like she was a business expense. Jake, I know how this sounds. It sounds like you helped plan the murder of a child for money. It wasn't murder. It was supposed to be property damage. But when it became murder, you covered it up. You let Blake and Vanessa think they'd gotten away with killing my daughter. Nick was crying now, but Jake felt no sympathy. How much were you paid? $50,000. Over 2 years. $50,000. That's what my daughter's life was worth to you. Jake's phone rang. Chief Jordan. Jake, where are you? Nick Power's house. Get out of there. Now. Federal agents are on their way to arrest him. For what? Everything. The FBI got your evidence packages. They've been investigating this insurance fraud ring for months, and your information connected all the dots. Jake looked at Nick, who was pouring another whiskey with shaking hands. Too late for that, Chief. Mr. Powers and I are having a very productive conversation. Jake, don't do anything stupid. Define stupid. Jake hung up and faced Nick. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write out a complete confession detailing your role in the conspiracy. Every name, every crime, every dollar you took. I can't. You can't and you will. Because if you don't, I'm going to tell the FBI that you tried to bribe me to keep quiet about Sarah's murder. That's not true. Prove it. Your word against mine, and I'm a decorated war veteran while you're a corrupt politician. Nick understood. He went to his computer and began typing. While Nick wrote his confession, Jake's phone buzzed with news alerts. The story was breaking nationwide. Corruption in small-town Cedar Falls, insurance fraud conspiracy, the murder of a soldier's daughter. By evening, every major network would be covering the story. Done, Nick said finally. Jake read the confession. It was comprehensive. Names, dates, financial transactions, and detailed descriptions of how the fraud ring operated. More than enough to destroy dozens of careers and send people to prison for decades. One more thing, Jake said. Who's at the top? Who runs the whole operation? Nick hesitated. If I tell you that, they'll kill me in prison. If you don't tell me, I'll kill you right here. Jake wasn't bluffing, and Nick knew it. Jesus Ford, Chicago attorney, handles insurance law for major corporations. He's the one who set up the whole network. Jake filed the name away for future reference. Thank you for your cooperation. Sirens were approaching outside. The FBI had arrived. Jake, Nick said desperately, what happens now? Justice happens. Finally, federal agents surrounded the house within minutes. Jake walked out with his hands visible, Nick's confession in one hand and his phone in the other. Special Agent Angelica Bray, the lead agent, introduced herself. We need to talk. They spent 6 hours at the federal building, going through every piece of evidence Jake had collected. Agent Bray was thorough, professional, and clearly impressed by the quality of Jake's investigation. Military intelligence training? She asked. Among other things. We've been tracking this insurance fraud ring for 18 months. Your daughter's case was the break we needed to expose the whole network. How many people are involved? Dozens. Maybe hundreds when we finish unraveling it. This conspiracy goes back at least a decade and spans multiple states. Jake thought about all the victims, people like Tommy Walsh, who'd been drugged and used as weapons, families who'd lost loved ones in staged accidents, honest citizens who'd paid higher insurance premiums to subsidize fraud. What happens to Blake and Vanessa? They'll be charged federally. Conspiracy, racketeering, murder in the commission of a felony. Blake's looking at life without parole. And Vanessa? Depends on how much she cooperates. But even with full cooperation, she's looking at 25 to life. That evening, Jake returned to Cedar Falls. The town was crawling with federal agents, reporters, and curiosity seekers. Murphy's Diner was packed with people discussing the scandal that had rocked their community. Jake avoided the crowds and drove to the cemetery. Sarah's grave looked the same, small headstone, fresh flowers, a reminder of a life cut short by greed and evil. It's over, baby girl, Jake said quietly. Daddy got the bad guys. The wind rustled through the pine trees, and for a moment, Jake could almost hear Sarah's voice. I love you, Daddy. 3 months later, Jake sat in a federal courtroom listening to Blake Sanders receive 5 consecutive life sentences. Vanessa got 25 years after cooperating with prosecutors. Nick Powers received 15 years in disbarment. Dozens of other conspirators faced various charges. Jesus Ford, the Chicago attorney who'd run the operation, was found dead in his office before he could be arrested. Officially a suicide, though Jake suspected Ford's criminal associates had decided he knew too much. Tommy Walsh was released from prison, his conviction overturned based on evidence of the conspiracy. He sent Jake a handwritten letter thanking him for proving his innocence. Agent Bray offered Jake a job with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. You've got skills we could use, she said. Jake declined. He'd had enough of hunting criminals for one lifetime. Instead, he started a foundation in Sarah's name, providing college scholarships for children who'd lost parents in military service. It wasn't enough to bring Sarah back, but it was something positive built from the ashes of tragedy. 6 months after the trials ended, Jake finally visited Sarah's grave one last time before leaving Cedar Falls forever. He'd sold the house, donated most of his possessions, and bought a small ranch in Montana where he could live quietly. "I have to go now, sweetheart," he told Sarah's headstone. "But I'll never forget you. And everyone who hurt you paid for what they did." Jake Mitchell had come home from war to find his daughter dead and his life destroyed. But he'd also found something else: the strength to fight for justice when the system failed, and the determination to make sure Sarah's death meant something. As he drove away from Cedar Falls for the last time, Jake thought about the lesson he'd learned. Sometimes the good guys do win. Sometimes justice is served, but only if someone cares enough to fight for it. Sarah Mitchell had died calling for her father, and her father had answered, 3 months too late, but with a vengeance that would be remembered for years to come. The war was over. Jake Mitchell had won.